Hello, spider friends. We're in the shed, so we're not live because the Wi-Fi doesn't go as far as the shed. So I would have to rely on my data, and I do not know how long I'm going to be speaking for. So we're not live is the long and the short of the matter. The point that I will eventually get to is that we should preserve history but be honest about history, and that's the basic point that I'm going to try and get across when you watch this garbly nonsense. Okay, alright. Because of the murder of George Floyd, things are changing right now in the world. Like literally, there's some really bizarre things I've heard from like people I know in real life. I'm a 90s kid, so I was brought up in the time of pop culture when everything had to have a lesson, like whether it was Thundercats or the little known but incredible sci-fi epic series Silverhawks. Like, Silverhawks fans, fist bump, represent. I know it's only me and like maybe 3 people who remember Silverhawks, and probably the people who were in it probably don't remember Silverhawks, but it was by the same people as Thundercats, and it was very, very good. Anyway, let's come back from that tangent. So like, when I was like growing up, everything was very like, whoa, environmentalism, like Fern Gully was a big thing. You're like, well, obviously this is the right thing. Anyway, but like, I was like pretty naive, because I'd always been taught to be like nice to everyone, and like, because I live in a sort of like a smaller, close community type area. It's not big city type stuff. There's not like really gang violence, so to speak. And I was generally unaware that racism still existed as a child. Like, I would see things on American TV and I was like, well, that can't be right. No, but everyone knows it's wrong to be racist. And it just like, I think when the Rodney King stuff happened, I was far too young at the time to understand what was happening. And when stories come over from America, generally, British people have a hard time believing these things to be true, because it's like, how on earth would somebody do this as a policeman and not be sent to prison for it? So, like, when you hear about police officers, like, brutalizing people, like, with batons, and, like, people being arrested even though they were complying, even though they weren't resisting arrest, and they were being, like, pulled around and stuff, like, it seems like something that would never happen where I live. So it's so hard to understand. And like, as technology's come on over the past few years and things are being recorded more, finally the whole world is getting a chance to see how common and how brutal some of these things are. And hopefully people are not going to continue to just accept this anymore, and they are going to be very vocal, very angry, totally understand it, and like, I'm not against it. Yeah, it might be controversial, but I'm not against it. So like, right now there's a lot of outrage. I'm actually getting to the actual point now. There's been lots of outrage about statues. Should we continue to have statues of controversial figures from history who were involved in things that at the time were how society was. So, like, for example, where I'm from, the local hero is Captain James Cook. There is a replica of his ship, the Endeavour, on the River Tees. It's like a historical accurate but like shrank. There's another version of the HMS Endeavour that like turns up at Whitby to celebrate like James Cook and his discovery of Australia. Now, James Cook would be cancelled today because, you know, he did some well dodgy things. But he is significant in history because he discovered Australia, right? We're not talking about the statue that got pulled down in Bristol, where it was like, well, this man was a slave owner, but later he paid for some like some books, and I'm a fan of literature. Historically speaking, to local history, who would be significant, but to like the world, not really as important. It's a part of the local history. So what the council should have done is, when people kept complaining about it, have the statue taken down, put into the local like history museum, so that the history is still there and it's preserved, but they're not venerating a slave trader. So like with James Cook, our local boy, there is a bit around here about James Cook, his birthplace. There's a statue in Great Ayton. The hospital is named after James Cook. The Captain Cook's birthplace museum had been like out of commission for quite a while, but it's just recently, well, it was going to reopen right before lockdown. So I'm not entirely sure what the status is on that. Yeah, so like he's a local boy, and erasing him, like not erasing, that's not the word, like I'm not maybe saying don't take down the statue, like, but I'm maybe saying like we need to be actually teaching the full story. So like, okay, right, in British schools, we're not really taught about the American Revolution at all. We learn about the Romans. We learn about like Roman Britain, Vikings, because they were a big invader. We learn about the Tudors and the Stuarts because they're the interesting ones. Nobody learns about like Edward II or Richard II, who was just, like at least Richard III had like a really cool movie that had Magneto and Iron Man in it. Anyway, so yeah, we're not taught about the American Revolution, the Americans like rebelling against the British. We're not really taught about that. We learn that history from watching American films and watching like American TV and being like, the Thanksgiving episode of Bob's Burgers is coming up. It's that time of year again. What a novelty. You know, like, I'm not sure how that era of history is taught in American schools, but I'm fairly sure that the British aren't well represented in that one. Like, which is fine, because it's true. And I don't know why I'm laughing. You know, like, it's true. And we shouldn't hide that. So that's what I'm sort of saying about maybe, like, historically significant characters, which is like, alright, if you are going to acknowledge them in society for historical preservation, like, be like, okay, well, this is the man that discovered Australia, however, you might not have got on with him very well in this day and age. just to sort of put a point on it, and be like honest and say like he did this, and he did this. And I don't think there's a problem. Like we have World War II museums, and it's like well, you don't hold back from telling them what like Hitler and Stalin did. So like how is it any different? I'm saying like don't venerate them but preserve the historical significance. And now to be fair to Captain James Cook, and this isn't in the museum, or it wasn't the last time I was in there, they might have updated it, I very much doubt it. So to be fair to Captain James Cook, he did sort of get a karma back on him because he was eaten alive. Or, well, he was killed and eaten. He was cannibalised. I think it was in Hawaii. I'm not entirely sure. That sort of, like, area. Like, this is, like, it's not taught. I had to read this in, like, a history book thing. Yeah, so, yeah, Captain Cook was eaten, which you can't say it wasn't a fair comeuppance being, you know, eaten along with the rest of your crew. Like, you know, it's like, well, you did some bad things, here's your punishment. What I'm trying to say very ineloquently is that we should preserve historical figures who have historical significance, such as the likes of Christopher Columbus, Captain James Cook, but we should be very clear about what these people did. And be honest and open about it. Speak about them the way that you're more comfortable speaking about somebody who's not on your side. In any kind of history program depicting like medievally type times, right? Doesn't matter what the historical actual king was like. It's always like, well, the British were the good guys. They're the French. They're French. Like, you know, like in every Hollywood movie that the villains are British. You get a bit of a complex about that as a kid. So then you kind of just end up embracing it and being like, well, if we're going to be the bad guys, we might as well enjoy it. That's why the Death Star's full of people walking into rooms and saying, sir, the rebels, they're here. Yes, that was an old Eddie Izzard bit for people who are my age and remember him when he was an actual comedian and not a strange beardy man. So I suppose my general point is we'll preserve history, but we'll be honest about it, and then we won't venerate people just because they're local. Venerate people who like they're local and they're not people who like were slave traders. There were people in history who were not slave traders, who may have lived in your area. So I know probably this will like what I am saying to our northeasty, our little region, is that we should preserve Captain Cook in the historical sense, but let's venerate people from our local area who weren't so problematic. So I've got some suggestions. Right. Number 1, Bob Mortimer. And you know he'd pose for the statue. Or, you know, like if well, House of Fools was cancelled, so it's not like Bob's up to much right now. He can always like, you can come and do a bit live. Maybe bring Vic with him. You know, they could put a hat out and they could earn tips. Yeah, so Bob Mortimer, Chris Rea, he is not problematic. Ridley Scott, Tony Scott. Pauline off EastEnders. Can't remember the actress's name off the top of my head. It'll come back to me in about 3 minutes and I'll be like, oh, I'm so annoyed. Also, Uncle Dursley, like Uncle, like Pie in the Sky. He was in Gorman Cast. He was in the History Boys. Oh my giddy aunt. I'd feel terribly ashamed of myself that I can't remember his name right now. You know, there are people who historically are from where you live that are like, this is a piece of local history, and the person wasn't terrible. You know, like in the case of the slave owner guy, like, what was so special about his life that it needs to be preserved? Like, well, he gave some money, that's nice, but he also bought and sold people. So maybe there could be somebody else instead who also did nice things, but wasn't problematic. And I'm sure I've just made this point over and over, but it seems like the stress of people just being openly racist. But if you called them on it and you said, like, what you are saying is racist, they'd be like, don't call me racist. Like at least own up to it. Like, you know, if you're going to do it, at least be honest about it, and don't be like, well, I'm not racist, and when you clearly are. Like, just because you're like not part of the direct problem doesn't mean that your inaction isn't problematic. I saw that those people were being racist towards that man, but I didn't say anything. Well, I saw that this guy called a taxi driver a P, but I didn't say anything. You know, like, if you normalise it, if you don't call people out on it, then people are just going to continue to do it. So yeah, how I generally feel about the statues is, like, we don't need to preserve people who aren't actually significantly important. If we are going to preserve people who are problematic, then we need to talk about it. Like, it's not like when we talk about Hitler, we don't mention, like, all the stuff. Mentioning all the stuff is the point. He's not famous because he was the Chancellor of Germany. He's famous for all the bad things he did. So, like, you know, let's be honest about our historical villains. The British, when Joan of Arc was captured from France, Britain was not very nice to Joan of Arc, to put that mildly, and I get a bit of history shame. I do. Because, you know, like, I'm a proud Brit, but also, well, that one's on us, and it's not very nice. Obviously, I've got nothing to do with decisions other people made, but, like, I feel as my country, I deserve to feel a little bit of shame about that. And, like, if you expect modern Germans to feel, like, a little bit of shame about the whole Hitler thing, then I think it's fair enough that you should feel a little bit of shame for all of the horrible things that we did. Like, and you know, this should go for everyone. like look at your historical figures. Is it Argentina where, like, World War II commanding people, why am I even trying to avoid Nazis, where the Nazis went through and lived out their long lives, that people in modern day should sort of feel a little bit of shame about that. And I'm, like, the only reason I'm saying a little bit is because if you really need to look back through your country's history and see all of the things that you should feel a little bit of shame for. I'm like, don't crush your brain feeling guilty for, like, everything that the country you happen to be born in was responsible for in terms of atrocities. But, like, you know, collectively, like, we should all feel a little bit of shame for all of the horrible things our ancestors did, because I think it's like, it's only polite, you know. So, like, I'm sure that modern day citizens in Japan feel a whole, like, little bit of shame about the whole, like, Nanking thing. There's probably a few, like, people who are in South Africa, like Bloemfontein or Johannesburg, people who are like, I quite feel a little bit of shame for the whole apartheid thing, and they should. Maybe if we can just more accept the fact that our team weren't always the good guys. Like, I think this is a very sort of modern thing where it's like, well, we are the heroes in our own movies, so we're always the good guys. Obviously, you know, Braveheart was made by Mel I Hate the English Gibson, who is, like, Australian and not American, despite what his accent sounds like now. All his films are very anti-British, and it makes those films uncomfortable to watch as a British person. But, you know, like, things happened, not the way that they happened in Mel Gibson's movie, not at all, but other historically accurate movies. Yeah, we're the bad guys in this one for real this time, not just because they filmed at, like, Elm's Tree or... Yeah. So in summation, let's not get our knickers in too much of a twist over statues of people who we never knew, they just existed. People are going mad about the statue thing, and it's like, you didn't know him. Let's put up a statue of someone we do like. Let's put up a statue of someone who everyone is like. Stan Laurel and Charlie Chaplin were both part of the Middlesbrough theatre group. Like, that's when, like, Stan Laurel was working with, like, Charlie Chaplin. Like, let's have a statue of Stan Laurel and Charlie Chaplin. Who would argue against that? Alright, Charlie Chaplin is problematic, actually, now that I think about it, but maybe just Stan Laurel then. But we'll be honest and be like, by the way, he liked a bit of a drink. Just one thing, I just want a disclaimer here. If you can't comment, it's not because I've turned the comments off, it's because YouTube hates me. Sometimes when I'll upload a video, YouTube will automatically turn the comments off and there's nothing I can do to turn them on. But, you know, use the like system if you even if you really massively disagree with me, and give me a thumbsy downsy instead of a thumbsy upsy. You know, I'd prefer the thumbsy upsy, but, you know, if you feel that strongly about it, give me the thumbsy downsy. I have not turned the comments off, it's just YouTube being dumb.